talk about a weird paradox in the world of work. You've probably seen it yourself. All this productivity advice, the stuff about habits, time management, you know the drill. Why does it seem to completely fall apart inside a big company? Well, the thing is, the advice itself isn't necessarily bad. The real problem is scale. What works great for just one person, well, it tends to just break when you try to apply it to 100 people, or even 1,000.
And that really gets to the heart of what we're digging into today. This is the big idea. Productivity isn't about individual performance. Not really. It's a system problem. See, the little tricks that help one person get through their day just don't scale up to make a whole organization run better. The real issue isn't our personal habits, it's the very design of the systems we're all working inside of.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll tackle what I call the productivity myth. Then, we'll get into where the problem really starts. After that, we'll look at the scaling problem and why things get so much worse in big teams. That leads us straight into why your best people, your high performers, are the ones who burn out. And finally, we'll contrast two different approaches, effort versus design.
Okay, let's dive into our first section, the productivity myth. This is all about that belief, and you know the one I'm talking about, that if every single person just tried a little harder, got a little smarter, or managed their time better, then poof, the whole company would magically become more productive.
So why does this idea stick around? I mean, why is it so persistent? Well, a few big reasons. For one, it's simple, right? It feels actionable. It gives you, as an individual, a sense of control. But here's the real kicker. It conveniently shifts all the responsibility away from the organization's messy, broken systems and puts it squarely on the shoulders of the employee. It's just easier than fixing the real problems.
But here's the counterintuitive truth, the core insight we need to grasp. You can't just scale productivity by asking people to try harder. It just doesn't work that way. Individual efficiency doesn't just add up neatly. In fact, when you try to optimize one person's job in a vacuum, you often end up creating massive bottlenecks somewhere else down the line. It's pretty clear we have to start looking beyond just individual effort.
So, if it's not about individual effort, then where does all this inefficiency really come from? To figure that out, we've got to start by getting our definition of productivity straight.
See, productivity isn't about how busy you look. It's not about activity for the sake of activity. At its core, it's a really simple ratio. It's your total output divided by the system's constraints. That's it. So if you really want to increase productivity, you only have two levers. You can try to increase output, or, and this is way more powerful, you can reduce the constraints that are holding you back. And what are these constraints? Well, they're not what you think. We're not talking about a lack of willpower or forgetting to do your morning routine. No, the real constraints are baked into the system itself. We're talking about things like coordination overhead, all those meetings about meetings, decision latency, just waiting and waiting for someone to make a call, dependency chains, where you can't do your work because you're stuck waiting on 3 other teams, and of course, error correction, all the time wasted fixing mistakes that a better system would have prevented in the first place.
So, here's a good way to picture it. Think of work happening on 2 different layers. Down here, you have the execution layer. This is where all that typical productivity advice lives. Your personal habits, your focus techniques, your to-do lists. But the real problems, the actual constraints, are created way up here at the system layer. This is where the company's architecture is decided, where workflows are designed, and where incentives are put in place, often in ways that don't make any sense. And that right there is the fundamental disconnect. By the time you're trying to use some fancy time-blocking technique to get your work done, it's already too late. The inefficiency was locked in way upstream. You're not actually being more productive, you're just getting better at managing the symptoms of a broken system.
Okay, so this brings us right to the main event, the scaling problem. We're going to see exactly why these individual tweaks and improvements just totally fall apart in big organizations. A broken system might be something you can work around with a small team, but once you start to grow, those little flaws don't just get bigger, they multiply.
Now check this out. The relationship between how many people you have on a team and how much it costs to coordinate them is not a straight line, not even close. As you can see, the overhead, the cost of just keeping everyone on the same page, it explodes. Think about it. A team of 5 has 10 different lines of communication to manage. A team of 50? It's over 1,000. Any little productivity gain you make as an individual gets completely wiped out by that massive systemic drag.
Here's an analogy that I think really helps. In a small boat, if you have a leak, one person with a bucket can probably keep you afloat.
But on a giant container ship, that same person with that same bucket is completely useless against a real structural problem. It's the same with organizations. Small teams can get by. They can tolerate inefficiency with a bit of hustle and good communication. But in a big system, those exact same little flaws get amplified into massive, system-wide problems.
And this amplification has very real, very painful consequences. A tiny delay in one little corner of the company sets off a domino effect, a cascade of delays across the entire organization. A small error that would be spotted and fixed in a minute on a small team, in a big system, it travels through layer after layer, getting worse and worse, until it's discovered and requires a mountain of rework to fix. Again, this isn't about people messing up. It's a problem with the structure itself.
So what's the human cost of all this? Who actually pays the price for these broken systems? Well, here's the paradox. It's almost always your best people. Your most dedicated, most effective employees are the ones who suffer the most.
In a badly designed system, your high performers, they basically become the human glue holding the whole operation together. They're the ones who step up and compensate for all the failures in the structure. They work longer, they push harder, they absorb all the friction the system generates. But, and this is the important part, that's not a long-term solution. It's totally unsustainable.
And what does that compensation actually look like on a Tuesday afternoon? Well, they're the ones always chasing down info because teams aren't talking to each other. They're the ones manually patching together two workflows that should connect, but don't. They are constantly putting out fires and finding workarounds for fundamental flaws in how things are set up. They're basically acting as a human software patch for the company's broken operating system.
And this brings us to a really critical, maybe even uncomfortable insight. Whenever you see a company celebrating individual heroics, you should see that as a giant red flag. It's almost always a sign that a deeper system failure is being covered up by the sheer unsustainable effort of a few people. And eventually, that effort runs out, and those heroes, they burn out.
So all of this leads to a fundamental choice, a fork in the road that every organization has to face. Are you going to keep trying to squeeze more effort out of your people? Or are you finally going to focus on improving the design of the system they work in? Okay, so we've pretty much established that the old way, the advice-driven approach, is a total dead end, especially for any company that wants to grow. So the big question is, what's the alternative? What does that actually look like?
Well, this really lays out the two different worlds. On one side, you've got the advice-driven model. It's all about individual discipline and willpower, which, let's be honest, are finite resources. It needs constant babysitting, and the second things get complex, it just falls apart. But on the other side, you have the systems-driven approach. This isn't about trying harder. It's about designing the work to be smarter, by doing things like reducing the number of handoffs, shortening feedback loops so you learn faster, and making sure everyone's incentives are actually pointed in the same direction.
And when you boil it all down, this is the key distinction. It's really this simple. One approach relies on sheer effort. The other relies on intelligent design. One is a constant uphill battle. The other builds a solid foundation that lets you actually scale your success.
And this is the real payoff. When you finally redesign the system, something amazing happens. Your individual effort stops being about just pushing a giant rock up a hill. Instead, it becomes leveraged. Every single bit of effort you put in creates a much bigger result, because the system is designed to amplify your work, not fight against it. And that, right there, is how you get real, compounding, sustainable productivity that can actually scale.
This channel explains money, artificial intelligence, and decision-making as interconnected systems. No hype, no gurus, no personal branding. New videos weekly.